everyone, I'm Anamika,
I'm Isin.
and we are exchange students from Singapore, spending a year working and studying in the Bay Area. And we like to spend our weekends building cool stuff, like FitCheck. Most startups fail not because of a bad product, but because they don't understand their market. That's why we built FitCheck, an AI-powered brand intelligence tool that solves this very problem for you. So our pipeline is very simple. You start with putting in your company name and your website URL, which is your front end into the world in the 21st century, the internet. And then from there, you can add any auxiliary materials you want to. If you have an upcoming product launch or more specific things that you want to analyze with respect to your brand, you can do that. And then you can put in any competitor URLs that you would like to. So say you don't know who your competitors are because you're working at the frontier of something. FitCheck can auto-generate that for you by doing the research that you need to do. So the idea here is to make the pipeline as smooth as possible for all consumers. We don't want to add any friction by adding too many parameters. So you can auto-generate this pipeline if you want to. And with the data sources, you can decide if you want to do it through Google search, reviewers, or any kind of social media. You can customize the pipeline. And then any goals that you have specific to upcoming product launches or anything else that you have in mind.
All right, so while that's loading, let's take a look at another report that we generated earlier.
So this report is on Arsicold, one of our favorite bakeries here in the Bay Area.
Okay, we can open it in the tab. Okay, so here we see a very high brand clarity of 95 out of 100. And in the brand snapshot alone, it looks at things like perceived strengths as well as gaps detected. So all of this is based on live data that is scraped because we wouldn't want the public perception that we're dealing with or that data to be based on stale information that we find online, right? We want everything to be the most as live as it can be, which is essentially why we use all of these scrapers to gather data. If you want to look at data that's more visual, you can get a brand resonance hotspot as well as a breakdown of all the source signals. Next up, something very important to all marketing personnel is the ideal customer profile. So it identifies the audience segments, breaks it down to different composition, and tells you about the profiles of all these ideal customers, right? It looks at pain points, looks at motivations, as well as their buying triggers. And again, this is all based on actual data. So you can click on all of these hyperlinks, which will take you to the source of where all of this information is coming from. Of course, another part of marketing comes with the outreach. So FitCheck does all of that work for you. You don't have to worry about, say, having to individually go and Google, where can I find someone who will help me publicize my product? You can simply just click on leads and it'll give you a list of creators and channels to look into. There are also communities that you can reach out to on platforms like Reddit. And so all of that is summarized here very neatly in FitCheck. Interestingly, you can have all of this information, you can have all of these actionables that are being suggested to you, and it's still a bit of work because you have to draft the messages yourself. You're the one who has to put in the effort to publish something on your website, right? So what we do to solve that is to kind of automate the process, and we call this our brand Copilot. So here is a plan that's generated based on all the data that I brought you through earlier, from brand ICP to leads, as well as all the actionables above. What we have here is a Copilot that kind of gives you a whole plan, ready-made plan that you can just act on, right? And if there's something you don't really like about it, you can edit it manually, or you could also talk to the Copilot chat here. So say I look at this and I'm like, I don't want a new homepage landing design. I think I just want a new page. Instead of a homepage, let's create a new page instead. Yeah, and so it'll go ahead and process what you've sent to it and make the changes to the plan. And once you're happy with the plan, you can go ahead and approve and execute the plan. Yeah, okay, so while that's gonna go on for a while, we can move on to the studio part.
So this is where our agentic workflows really start, and what we see really as the future of all kinds of marketing with AI. So the important part of go-to-market is not just understanding your main demographics, it's more of intimately understanding who your customer is and what they like and dislike. So that's where we segment our ICP, ideal customer profiles, and the different ways that the market has been segmented into individual personalities and profiles. So complete with names and demographic features alongside psychographics, which is their likes and dislikes, pain points, and any kind of buying triggers that might be useful for your company to know. And then what is important and interesting is the 5-second reaction, because your first impression of your product is probably the most important thing that you are going to engineer. And so the next step to take here is, how can I talk to my customers? So one thing you can do is chat with each of these personalities. So let's talk to Chloe Davis, who's a culinary school graduate and who probably has a lot to say about RCult. So let's ask Chloe, what do you like about RCult that you can't make yourself at home? Yeah, so apparently Chloe really does see the value of RCult, and you can go back and forth with her as you please. And then next, say we understand what our individual customers want, but we want to know what they're like when they coexist with one another. And this is where focus groups come in, where you can decide to add any and all of your ideal customers and put them into a group and talk to them like they're all in a group chat for you. So let's ask, what would make you go to a different bakery on a Sunday morning? So here, interestingly, they'll respond one by one, but they'll also start building on one another's responses, disagreeing and agreeing as we see. So here we can see Chloe agrees with Sarah, and they have a lot to say about the reputation of RCult, award-winning croissants, which is really what we read about when we first came to San Francisco as well. And then the next thing you can do once all of your personas have responded is flip the table. What do they have to ask you based on their interests? And here is where you can aggregate and see things that you may not have come up yourself as a brand, but what FitCheck can come up with based on research from the internet in real time. So to do this, we use Apify's web API, and all of this is happening simultaneously with parallel threads to reduce latency.
And well, I mean, after a really long conversation and you want to have a more structured way of organizing all the data that you get from speaking to these personas, you can then click Generate Report. So we can show an example of a report that we generated from previous conversation with these personas. Similar question where you go to a different cafe and then they ask questions. And yep, that's the log. Then view report. Over here was the report that shows you the signal based on the conversation they have had with them, what they agree with, a summary of their objections and their priorities, as well as consensus signals. So it's just a very nicely condensed way of keeping track of all these conversations that you're having with the personas.
And fully automating this allows you to gain more data than you would have if you were doing it manually. And so the next step here is, I don't want to be texting my focus groups constantly. Maybe I want to be talking to them simultaneously and actually hearing what they have to say and be able to generate the report from there. So this is where our multimodal panel comes in, where we can ask them questions.
What is your favorite thing about the RCult bakery? And then they all prepare their own individual responses. So nicely, it also does give you a bit of like a sentiment indicator, so you can kind of track how their different moods change over time. So this is multimodal, so they will end up speaking to you over audio. And again, similar to how the previous chat works, you can also generate a report from it.
And so the next step here is, how can we make all of these discussions much more rigorous? And this is very important for research labs or real teams that are trying to figure out how they can quantitatively measure future releases or anything else that they want to do with their brand. So here we have focus group experiment mode, where you can customize any experiment that you might want to conduct on your ideal customer base and see how they would react to whatever hypothesis you have. So here we'll do an A/B test on a new release for RCult Bakery. So we can test the difference between a reaction to a croissant cake versus a croissant ice cream.
It's optional. You can fill it in. You can choose who you want to contribute to the A/B test. So let's just take a bunch of people.
Once again, we want to prioritize modularity, speed, and rigor with all of these different modes that we have. And once you have everything that you need for your experiment, FitCheck will generate an experiment brief for you to approve first before it actually executes the experiment. All right, so it's come up with a pretty rigorous experiment brief, complete with a hypothesis, the methodology it's going to use, and how exactly our customers are going to be talking to each other. And once you're happy with the plan, you can confirm and have it execute the session. And here is where the magic really happens. All of this will be completely autonomous and led by your agents themselves. And you can see them talking to each other in real time and what they have to say about the product or any hypothesis that you have. And as they're talking to one another, the LLM metrics show you how the sentiment changes over time and what exactly is going on a meta level with all of these conversations, where they build on one another, disagree, and figure out if they can come to a consensus together, all on their own. So once the experiment is over, FitCheck will aggregate a report for you with quantitative and qualitative data on how that went and whether or not you could get a clear signal from that.
Okay, so we're gonna go back to the brand Copilot that's now done running. And based on the design that you made, you can see that it does give you some like messaging signals that you can take on based on the actionables, the outreach that it advises you. And you can do it in like a single click as well after you connect your accounts. So this could be like X or as well as a LinkedIn. So those are the main platforms that we're working with, as well as some creative assets. So if you're not happy with the plan, you want to regenerate some assets, you can go ahead and do that. So for example, I want to view plan again and I realize, I kind of want image generation to be part of it, right? So I can toggle that on and save plan edits and it will regenerate some assets for you.
So the thing about FitCheck is we understand that companies really need to understand their customer bases. Not only do they need to do that in a very deep and intimate way, they also need to be able to move quickly when it comes to these things, which is why automating things like actions and reaching out to leads can actually help companies move much faster and figure out whether or not they're moving in the right direction much sooner than they would have without FitCheck.
Okay, so now that we have the context on what FitCheck does, just some AI-powered brand and ICP analysis tool, we want to look at the technical challenge behind it, which mainly is that it's not just one AI call, right? It's a multi-stage, multi-section pipeline. So where RocketRide helps us in this aspect is to run that pipeline more cleanly and in parallel. The problem without RocketRide that we found when building this product is that the node runner uses promise or settled to run 6 AI section generators at once. So that gives us network concurrency, but everything is still sharing the same node process, the same event loop, as well as memory and garbage collect. Under load, prompt building, JSON parsing, result validation, and result assembly, they all compete in the same runtime, which is not ideal. There's also the safety issue, right? Which is that any raw script reviews and social posts may contain information that should be secure and confidential. And without any enrichment, that text can flow into both Postgres and third-party LM prompts. So the pipeline works, but Node starts become a tiny air traffic controller with too many planes. So this is where we look at the RocketRide pipeline architecture. With RocketRide, FitCheck ends up describing the analysis as a graph. The input would fan out into the 6 LLM nodes, looking at brand perception, ICP assessment, actionables, lead suggestions, the ICP Studio, and the resonance map. So these are all features that we showed earlier. And RocketRide will be able to execute these nodes in parallel and merge them through a response output barrier. So instead of having to manually coordinate 6 promises and then stitch the partial results, what we get here is that we get one structured report object.
All right, so before prompts are built in the first place, RocketRide also supports post-scrape enrichment. So we redact any kind of PII, score sentiment, and extract entities from user-generated text like reviews or social mentions on social media through X and LinkedIn and any of the other platforms we've integrated. So this means that the LLM at the end of it receives much cleaner input, pre-labeled context that we didn't have to touch at all. So it does not have to refer everything from raw prose every time, and it can focus on higher level synthesis, which puts much less load on the tokens that you want to use for real value generation. So next, what RocketRide actually improves is really at the architectural level. So it moves parallel execution and connection handling all into a very low-level runtime, akin to something like C++. So at the end of it, FitCheck would still own the scraping and the prompts and the persistence, the authentication, but RocketRide will own the AI pipeline execution. So really what RocketRide has helped us with is latency handling. And ultimately, the way we've deployed this is such that the integration is optional at the end of it. If RocketRide is down, FitCheck will run as it is, but you will notice a latency change. But at the end of it, all of these fallbacks are meant to preserve reliability with our system.
Yeah, I think just for like a bit of like metrics context, before RocketRide integration, each repo was taking minimally 5. Easily could go up to 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And when we ran it earlier, it was like sub 2.5 minutes. Just like great, right? It's more than half of the time taken.
Yeah, ultimately, what RocketRide is helping us with is owning the orchestration and allowing FitCheck to really focus on what needs to run, and RocketRide will handle the logistics of it. So at the end of the day, this gives us a cleaner foundation for a product that is becoming increasingly agentic. We see more and more uses for things like focus groups and our experiment mode with the new products that are coming out every day. And so generating these reports in a qualitative manner that can actually result in actionables that will help teams is really useful when it's done fast.